Okay, everybody, good to see you again. Great to have everybody join us. We're going to go through another DBQ, and just a reminder, so what we're doing is we're taking a document-based question, which is what you're going to get on the exam, and we're breaking it down, and we're also kind of doing an overall review while we're doing that. One thing I do want to point out is on the new DBQ, it is in a shorter amount of time. You only have 45 minutes, but you only have 5 sources you have to go through. So it's a shortened DBQ. And I want you to notice here, as this will be our 3rd DBQ to go over together, that they're always going to hit on a high theme. Okay, they're going to take a chunk of time, and they're going to ask you about something specifically, like how did things change during this period? How did they stay the same? How did this influence economics or social or society at this time? So they're going to have these kind of large themes where, again, you have quite a bit of A, time, and B, events and individuals to gather from to make your argument. So you're not going to see a question like, in 1941 this happened, explain the causes of the attack on Pearl Harbor. No, they're going to give you like a decade and say, hey, what happened in this decade, kind of explain how this led into the following decade. So they won't ask you something too specific there. So again, so here's the agenda for the call today. And again, I hope you guys are getting the emails. Again, it kind of does some squirrely things to me with that. But if you ever, I send them out at the beginning every week. So if you don't get one, please holler at me and I can make sure that your email is in there correctly and everything else. So again, I left the changes that the College Board made up at the top. I'm going to continue to talk about HIP. And I know it's some of you guys, you're probably tired of hearing that, but I do. Especially for a DBQ exam, which is what this turned into, the Corona exam here. Historical context, intended audience, point of view, and purpose. If you look at sources and you think through that, that is how you analyze a source. Okay, I don't want you to get stuck. I want you to do that with every source. Think about the historical context, who the intended audience is, the point of view, and the purpose. By the way, you're not going to have that for every source. Every source might not have a purpose, right? I mean, it might just be a map. Like, what's a map's purpose? Well, to show people where things are, right? So that might not give you some in-depth analysis. But again, those 4 give you, if you will walk through those with a source, I think that is a way to make sure that you have enough information to use in your essay. And then I linked to the other DBQs we went over. So all that's there. Let's dig into the DBQ that we're going to cover today. So this is from 2010. So, man, that was 10 years ago. It makes me feel so old. All right, so the question was, the issue of territorial expansion sparked considerable debate in the period 1800 to 1855. Again, like I pointed out earlier, they're giving you about 50 years there to play with. Analyze this debate and evaluate the influence of both supporters and opponents of territorial expansion in shaping federal government policy. Use the documents and your knowledge of the years 1800 to 1855 in your answer. So, by the way, always, if they pick a weird day or a weird point in time, always think about why did they pick a weird year. Like, why do you think they chose 1855 instead of 1850? Does anybody want to tackle that for me? Why not just round it off at 1850? So I'm gonna postulate a theory here, right? We have the Compromise of 1850. Which was a big compromise in dealing with the northern and southern states and the way that territories are going to go moving forward. So they probably didn't want there to be any kind of misunderstanding or confusion for students that are like, well, does that count? Is that inside 1850 or is that like after 1850, since that wasn't signed till the fall of 1850? So they probably extended it 5 years to make sure there wasn't any complication with that. Does that make sense? You'll notice sometimes, like, if they ask you a question and they go up to 1945, they're probably making sure that all of World War II is on there, right? So if they ever give you a weird number that's not like a 50 or a 00, you might just want to think for a second about why did they choose that weird number. So again, I think that part of what this is to ensure that if you wanted to use that as an example in 1850, you could, okay? So let's jump back over there. Always weird numbers. Think about why they throw them at you. So Here is the first source. What we're going to do is we're going to read it out loud. Again, some of you are on like your phones. It's probably hard to read, so I will read it out loud. Then I want us to go through the HIP analysis together. By the way, notice, did they give us categories? They did. They want us to evaluate the influence of two groups, supporters and opponents of territorial expansion in shaping federal government policy. So they have given us criteria. So as we're reading, we need to figure out, are these a supporter of territorial expansion or are they an opponent? Okay, and then what impact did they have? Got it? So as we're going through, think, is this person supporting territorial expansion or opposing it? And then the second part is, and so what effect did they have on government policy? So if you are in a place where you can do this, I would take out your handy dandy notebook. And I would, as you go through here, let's look at document A. I would just jot down A and let's take notes here as we go. So this is from a congressional debate of 1803. This is James Elliott, Federalist of Vermont. The Constitution is silent on the authority of acquisition of territory. By the treaty, we acquire territory. Therefore, the treaty is unconstitutional. Samuel Thatcher, a Federalist from Massachusetts. This acquisition of distant territory will involve the necessity of a considerable standing army. So justly, an object of terror. Do gentlemen flatter themselves that by purchasing Louisiana, we are invulnerable? No, sir. Spain will still border on the southern frontier, and so long as Spain occupies the country, we are not secure from the attempts of another nation more warlike and ambitious. William Plummer, Federalist of New Hampshire, admit this Western world into the Union, and you destroy with a single operation the whole weight and importance of the Eastern states. Okay, so this one's kind of tricky because they give you a few people in one, but this is part of a congressional debate. And guys, if you don't know this, if you were in my class last year, I had that huge book that was all the legislation that had been passed through Congress, and then it was the congressional debates. Like, especially early on, they used to write all this down and give this out at the end of every legislative session, like what were the minutes of Congress. So it was just like their arguments back and forth, and it looked like this. It was just like so-and-so said this, and so-and-so said this, and blah, blah, blah. You know, nowadays, luckily, we have like C-SPAN, which I hope you all are avid watchers of, right? Right? Oh, yeah. Which is basically just, there's a live stream of the House of Representatives. That's C-SPAN. C-SPAN 2 is a live stream of the Senate. By the way, a plug for local government. We have live streams of the House and the Senate here too. Actually, the committee meetings also. So if you ever want to watch what the Oklahoma legislators doing, they stream that live too. They've actually upped their game a little bit. It used to be really, really clunky. Now it actually streams a little bit better. So you can actually watch those things. But back then, people had to read what they said. So where would you categorize this? Is this a document that would be supporting or opposing territorial expansion? Let's break it down. James Elliott says that the treaty to expand is unconstitutional. So he is an opponent. Thatcher, you know, kind of, he gives a little bit more detail here, but he says, Spain will border on the southern frontier, and as long as Spain occupies that country, we are not secure from the attempts of another nation more warlike and ambitious. So what's he worried about? The acquisition of a distant territory will involve the necessity of a considerable standing army, so justly an object of terror. What he's concerned about is the more territory we buy, the more that we grow, it's going to require more of an army to hold all of that land. And as we do that, are we stirring up problems, right? Are we growing and growing our army, growing and growing our country, getting closer and closer to places like territory owned by Spain? Are we going to cause a conflict that's unnecessary, right? William Plummer says, admit this Western world of the Union, you destroy with a single operation the weight and importance of Eastern states. So an interesting kind of argument here, right? Which is the more that we grow the country, the more that we add additional states on, what does that do to our Eastern states? It weakens their power. Okay, which is true, right? I mean, like the more states you have, when you vote, you'd rather be one of 13 voting rather than one of 26, right? You have more power that way. So all of these are different types of arguments that all oppose. So again, if you're doing a little note taking, these all three oppose, but they all have their different reasons. One thinks it's unconstitutional, one thinks it'll cause an unnecessary conflict, and the third thinks that it will give less importance to eastern states. Okay, HIP analysis, obviously we know historical context is there's a treaty that they're working on, right? In the early 1800s, that's what they're dealing with. We also know that there are problems going on with Spain, also with France going on in the early 1800s. Do we have any recollection there in U.S. history and world history of what's happening in the early 1800s with Spain and France? There's a little dude. I mean, he was little. I wouldn't say that to his face, but Napoleon, right, who's going around trying to conquer the world. We also have the Spanish that there had that territory in southwestern United States. And this is all precipitating the War of 1812. So there's all these kind of struggles for this land here in North America. And of course, you still hear people talk about this today, but there's definitely the kind of elitism of the eastern states. And I mean, some of that's understandable, right? I mean, they were the first states, you know, they were colonies. They're where our first presidents come from, our politicians come from. You know, it's that Virginia, it's Massachusetts, it's New York. So they definitely have this kind of elitist view that, you know, the more we expand, and by the way, they kind of look at the people on the frontier and go, yeah, you guys are a little bit more out there than us. So we really kind of want to keep the power here in the eastern part of the United States. That's absolutely part of this as well. So that's our historical context. And again, this is a congressional debate. So the purpose is they're debating the treaty, right? Point of view, we already went over that. So again, I'm going to move much faster now, but you guys kind of get the high level view there of the way we're going to analyze these documents. So now let's move a little bit quicker. I do like Mr. Carnes, their background view of the manifest destiny there, right? Because you're going to see that come into play here with this argument here very quickly. Notice we've got a map here. Always be careful with a map. I try to talk to you guys about this before. Any kind of chart or map, really kind of take your time for a second. Make sure you read the title, see what they're getting, what point they're trying to drive home. So distribution of voters in the House of Representatives on the declaration of war on June 4th, 1812. So this is the War of 1812, obviously. And you're looking here, it says dots represent homes of members voting on the measure as follows. Affirmative are the circle that's not colored in. The dot that is colored in is negative. So what could you draw from looking at this map? Is this a source that shows what? What is this telling us here? Probably something that you could have assumed without having a map, right? That's the further west you go, are people more likely to vote to oppose expansion, or do they want expansion? Of course, the further west you go, people want expansion, right? So this is going to be a view. Now, by the way, would you say this document, would you categorize this as an argument or that it can be used to oppose or reaffirm territorial expansion? Somebody make a case for one of those for me. Do you think that this shows this is a good example or piece of evidence to oppose it or support territorial expansion? Oh, come on, my would-be attorneys out there. I think you can argue this one either way really easily, right? Well, let's make the argument for it. Okay, so let's say this is supporting territorial expansion, and what one argument could be, well, look, the people that are actually expanding see the benefits of it and they want to keep expanding, okay? So that could be a benefit, right? Also, that the people that are voting against it, they're way over here. Like, what do they know about what's out there, okay? They're just trying to keep their power in their eastern bloc, so they're obviously voting no. You could also make the argument, right, on the other side that, look, the people that are voting to expand are the people that are going to benefit directly from it expanding. So, of course, they're going to vote for it. They want more land. They want more say in government. So of course they want, us to move further west because our troops will then help protect them, and they'll have more access to resources to the west. So honestly, you could use this one either way. Again, it is however you want to look at it when we get to the end of these documents, whatever argument you're going to make. So by the way, you guys stop me anytime or wave your hands or shoot something here in the chat if you need me to, if you got a comment or you want me to slow down or say something or have a comment here on anything that's said. So let's keep going. Lewis, document C is Lewis Cass, and this is from Documents and Proceedings Relating to the Formation and Progress of a Board in City of New York for the Immigration, Preservation, and Improvement of the Aborigines of America in 1829. Okay, just go ahead and again, as you're reading, always try to draw connections and kind of preview what you think. But remember, if you're hearing the term Aborigines of America, you're probably about to read about the indigenous people, the Indian tribes, right? That was a term that was often thrown around at them, especially in the early 1800s. Existing for 2 centuries in contact with a civilized people, the Cherokees have resisted and successfully to every effort to ameliorate or improve their situation, or to introduce among them the most common arts of life. Their moral and their intellectual condition have been equally stationary. And in the whole circle of their existence, it would be difficult to point to a single advantage which they have derived from their acquaintance with the Europeans. All of this is without a parallel in the history of the world. That it is not to be attributed to the indifference or neglect of the whites, we have already shown. There must then be an inherent difficulty arising from the institutions, character, and condition of the Indians themselves. Okay, so what do we see here? How would you guys summarize what is being said here in this document? That despite what the Americans are doing, what have the Cherokee done? It says they've remained stationary. They've been equally stationary. And that's not because the whites haven't tried. So they're basically saying like, hey, we can't help them. Like they're staying the same. Okay. So what does this have to do with territorial expansion? Why would they include this document here on territorial expansion? This is kind of the unfortunate reality of when you look at a document like this, right? Like it really shows you a big reason for Indian removal, right? That they're making the argument, we should be able to continue gaining territory and expanding because look, we're trying to help these Native American people. You can't help them. And I mean, the end is a particularly troubling statement. There must be an inherent difficulty arising from their institutions, characters, and the condition of the Indians themselves. So they're saying like, hey, they're just kind of this way. Like you can't help them. You can't civilize them. That was a term they used to throw at the Indians all the time, that you weren't civilized. So this is absolutely a justification for taking their land, for moving west, okay? So you see that a lot, and I think I've mentioned this to you guys several times, as we're talking about the 1820s. Don't forget that this is the age of Andrew Jackson, right? I mean, they literally call this the Jacksonian era. And just think about that. We don't have a Washington era, we don't have a Jefferson era, but we have a Jacksonian era because he drove so much and he really represented what a lot of people thought back then. And I've told you guys this in the past, that yes, Andrew Jackson signed the Indian removal, and yes, he should be criticized for that. Completely understand that from a historical perspective. I also want you to remember it was called the Indian Removal Act. It passed through Congress. It passed through the House. It passed through the Senate. It was very popular. So I don't think that makes Andrew Jackson any better, right? But it just shows you that there was that sense of a lot of people, that a lot of Americans wanted the Indians out of the way and they wanted that land. So it wasn't just him. It was really explanatory of a lot of Americans at that point in time, especially the ones that lived in the West, okay, that they really wanted more land. So if you kind of talk down the Indians and say, look, we've tried to help them, but you really can't help them, that's again, been argument to getting that. So that is a support, that argument, and that argument is trying to convince you, right? Notice what I just talked through. That's really the purpose of this document, is to explain to people why, look, if the Indians get mad because we take their land, like, sorry, we tried to help them, we couldn't help them. So that's really the purpose of that document right there. Got us another map here. So you got this, kind of blank area, little box with nothing in it. That is the ceded lands and lands of secession. Then it shows you the routes of the American Indian removal. Then you got the American Indian reservations, and then you have the boundaries of 1830. So this is what was drawn out in 1830. So then you can see kind of movement there. And you can also notice the years here. And I think that's also something that I think you guys probably recognize. Living in Oklahoma, we kind of know that, but a lot of other people, I think outside of the South, don't sometimes miss that. But there's multiple removals, right? There's the one that we most refer to as kind of like the Trail of Tears, and there's even multiple removals that have that descriptor there as a Trail of Tears. But the one that you're going to hear people talk about is that Seminole. Sorry, of 1832, but you have a Cherokee of 1835 up there in North Georgia. You even have the Sac and Fox. If you look up north, their removal in 1832 at the same time. So there's multiple events going on within a few years of themselves. You have the Choctaw one of 1830. So that even kind of predates a lot of what we think of as Indian removals. So when you look at all that, how can you use this? And again, I'm going to scroll back up to the top and just make sure that we remember kind of the question that we were asked it is the supporters and opponents in shaping federal policy. So at this point in time, what I would say in looking at this document is, okay, so the supporters won because we moved west, okay, and we have this land here. So they won that argument. And now look at the political effect. So because the supporters won, what has their impact been? We have a new state, right? We have a new territory that's being created here, where the Indians are going. So we have this Oklahoma territory. It isn't called Oklahoma territory yet, but you have these reservations to which the Indians have been moved. So that is a direct effect of what the supporters have done now. Indians have been moved west, and they are all congregating in this area. So that's what I would put, that this is a document that talks about what the supporters did, and it shows that they have created new territories, and also they have removed Native Americans from these other territories in order to have more land as they move westward. This one actually is in that, if you use the American Pageant textbook, this one is in there too. So you have the Eagle map of the United States. So what might the Eagle map of the United States be trying to show us here? I mean, it's not really showing you any kind of movement or anything like that. This would be kind of a propaganda piece, right? If you've ever heard the terms like, it's cliched now, but if before you guys graduate, I'm sure someone will say something to the effect of, it's time for you to spread your wings and fly. Okay. So yeah, if you haven't heard that now, you will definitely hear that as you guys approach graduation. That's definitely a thing that older people try to say when they're trying to relate to younger people or something like that. But so what you have here is you have an eagle representing, kind of Americana, and it represents all of America, and its wings are spread out across the landscape, meaning this land is due to the Americans. Again, Mr. Korn's background right there, manifest destiny. If you hear the term manifest destiny, please remember it is the belief that God intended for the Americans to control this entire continent. Now, by the way, I know it's really easy to focus on the negatives of that. There's also an argument to be made that there were some positives that came from it, which is there was a sense of responsibility. Now, by the way, most of the time it didn't manifest itself in a good way, right? Like they come into the Indians and say, hey, we're trying to teach them this and that, and they won't listen. But at the same time, they do come in and build roads, they do build schools, they build churches, they build hospitals. They think that they should be helping the people they come in contact with. So there is the religious aspect. It's just like the colonists, guys, okay? If you go back to like imperialism, right? They're taking people's land. There's a lot of bad treatment of people. There's also the flip of that, which is they think they should be teaching them Christianity. So they kind of have this internal struggle of we're overpowering them, but at the same time, we're supposed to be helping them. It's very similar in Manifest Destiny, that the Americans believe that they do owe the land, that they should be controlling it, but then they also believe that they should be helping as they do that they should be creating a better place for people to live. So you're going to see that kind of back and forth here, and there's good examples of people that actually try to help Indian groups, and then there's people that just try to kill the Indians and get them out of their way. So there's definitely examples of both that you guys have covered throughout the year. So now here's going to be a speech. Sorry, hold on. Sorry, guys. So this is a speech from Thomas Benton, 1844. The settlers in Oregon will also recover and open for us the North American road to India. This road lies through the South Pass and the mouth of the Oregon. And as soon as the settlements are made, our portion of the North American continent will immediately commence its Asiatic trade on this new and national route. So what we see here is the belief that what? They could create a road if they created this pass through Oregon, that it would eventually do what? It would lead all the way to Asia. Okay, now remember, I mean, they're not fully sure of what this looks like to the northwest. Okay, where we have what the Lewis and Clark expedition told us, which was what? Lewis and Clark, do not forget that expedition does a huge job of motivating Americans to move westward, because they read these stories, and these stories are like surreal. They talk about there's these huge deer that run through the forest, and when they run, the whole forest shakes, and they thought they were dinosaurs. They're talking about elk. So people read those and go, what? How are there deer so big they shake the whole forest? And guys, if you've ever hunted up north or seen a video, I'm not kidding. When those elk run through the woods, it is unbelievable. I mean, people talk about it. It is almost surreal how large they are when they move in those herds. That it just this shaking of the earth. So there were these stories of bears. Of course, they talked about there was this big brown bear that was 3 times the size of a black bear from other grizzly bear. So there were all these stories they were talking about that made people want to go out west and see what was there. But there was the belief that if you could create some sort of passageway, that eventually you could get over to Asia. Okay, so that belief, and if you guys remember even from world history, a lot of the early settlers believed in the 7 cities of Cibola, that there were 7 cities that were made entirely of gold out west. We just hadn't gotten far enough to find them. And there's debate among historians whether that was like a misinterpretation, or some early explorers really said they found gold out west. It's kind of hard to know that for sure. But whatever, that legend lived on for a long time. So you continue to have settlers that wanted to find either a passageway or these 7 cities of gold. All right, let's jump down here to this one. Henry David Thoreau, Civil Disobedience, 1849. This is a little bit off the political path, so let's jump into this one. This is document I. The government itself, which is only the mode which the people have chosen to execute their will, is equally liable to be abused and perverted before the people can act through it. Witness the present Mexican War, the work of comparatively a few individuals using the standing government as their tool, for in the outset the people would not have consented to this measure. So Thoreau, by the way, guys, he's a philosopher. If you remember kind of, why is he writing this Civil Disobedience? Okay, he got locked up, right? He refused to obey a law, so he got locked up. And Henry David Thoreau, he's written during this time. If you remember, we read some Ralph Waldo Emerson as well, that they were very much naturalists. They like to go out and be distant from society and do this kind of deeper thinking. And so it's interesting when they would kind of talk about some political issues like this, because he's saying that the Mexican-American War used the government as their tool. In the outset, that people would not have consented to this measure. So what he's saying there is that the people, okay, the government, and this is just kind of a deeper point, right? He's saying the government, which is the people use the government as a way to say, look, we want there to be better roads. How are we going to do that? We're going to let the government, we're going to elect people and we're going to tell them what we want them to do, and they're going to be the ones who actually do it. But what happens when the government does something and gets the ball rolling on something that the people don't support? So he believed that that creates this really dangerous scenario, that if the government does something that's outside the will of the people, that they are really coming into conflict with their core mission. And now the people are really torn, because if you go back to kind of our founding documents, right, this is power given over to government. And now this kind of depends on where you fall on the spectrum. And we're going to go a little bit deeper for a second, because this is a theme that plays, I guess, playing out right now, right? So Jefferson is a firm defender of, if the government operates outside of its bounds, you don't need to listen to it. Okay, that it's got very specific powers, and one of the checks on those powers is the public. And so if they operate outside of that realm, you don't need to obey it. They really have no authority when they operate outside of their authority, if that makes sense. So what their powers are, if they try to do something outside of that, they technically don't have authorized power, okay? Then you have the other side of the coin, which is kind of the Adams, Hamilton, okay? But if you don't like what the government does, then you need to change it through the mechanisms of government, meaning like, hey, elect somebody else, call your politician, get them to change the laws, whatever, but you got to operate within the bounds of what the government officials say, because you put them up there. And in putting them up there, you've agreed to be subservient to their authority on specific issues, okay? So again, I know we kind of got deeper with this, but what Henry David Thoreau is saying is, no, that can be thrown off at any time. Like if they do something that's outside the will of the people, all right, they've gone too far, okay? Just in that instant, they've gone too far. So, okay, tie all that back to what we're talking about. Remember, he's talking about the Mexican War, and he's saying that this was something that the elite wanted. And again, I don't know if you guys have seen this in presidents' lists, but James K. Polk is an interesting president to rank, okay? Like if I asked you guys who are the best presidents right now, I think you guys would probably be like, oh, Washington, Lincoln, Roosevelt, like you probably have the usual suspects, right? What I think is fascinating, and by the way, maybe if you guys want to do this, I would love to do, us just do a class, just let's rate them. I love just rating presidents with students. I think it's fascinating to see what you guys' thoughts are and coming up with criteria on what makes a good president or not. Because you could go popularity, you could go on who got the most done, you could go on who stood the test of time of having the most, the accomplishments that have been the best for all of Americans. I mean, there's a lot of different criteria you can kind of balance out, but here's an interesting one, right? So James K. Polk. James K. Polk grew the United States dramatically and won a war. It was a beatdown. Mexican-American War, the Americans win, they gain Texas, Mexico, New Mexico, Arizona, part of California. It really is the jumping off point for growing America. It was highly popular after it was over. It grew the economy of the Americans by now having access to all of these supplies and all these resources. Okay, so is he one of the best presidents? Some people put him in a top 10 list, but now let me flip the coin on you here. Now we've kind of looked back and said, okay, was that a right, just war to go into Mexico and take land, take territory for the sake of growing the United States? Now, it depends on where you fall in that argument, right? If you want to contextualize it and say, look, is 1840, everyone's taking land from everybody. Like, that's the game, right? Spanish are trying to gain territory, the French are trying to gain territory, the British are, and so are we. you might contextualize it like that and say, well, if that's the metric, right? If that's what we're measuring people by in 1840s, then I guess he did a good job. Or if you take the point of view that that set the United States on a path of territory acquisition, of imperialism that you disagree with, that you think was a bad direction, well, then you're probably not going to rank him in your top 10, right? And so it's all kind of perspective here on the imperialistic side. But that's why I'm always interested to see, do students think James K. Polk is, I mean, again, won a war easily, economy got better, was highly popular. But if you contextualize it, he was successful by his peers. But again, he did something that today, I mean, that wouldn't be popular at all, right? If someone says, hey, we're going to go and invade another country just because, well, we just want their land, probably wouldn't go over very well today, right? So it's all a matter of what your criteria are. But that's a little bit of context there for James K. Polk. I want to stop there. So let's take a look at what we've got. So civil disobedience, that is, by the way, kind of finishing up my thought there as I digressed off on James K. Polk. Henry David Thoreau is definitely someone opposed to territorial acquisition, okay? So let's set this up. So if we wrote an essay, what we would do in the opening paragraph, and I can actually here, you're about to see how bad I am at typing stuff up. I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the little whiteboard here. All right. Oh, you're not going to let me copy paste. What in the world? There we go. Okay. So here is our topic, right? The issue of territorial expansion sparked considerable debate in the period, blah, blah, blah. Analyze this debate and evaluate the influence of both supporters and opponents of the territorial expansion in shaping the federal government policy. Okay, so thesis statement. We'll go something like, anybody want to help me out? Anybody want to walk me through this? You're just going to make me do this? Olivia, where are you at? You going to help walk me through this? Ashley Court? Raksha, you still busy with the piano over there? Okay, fine. I'm going to start it. Then I expect someone to jump in and help me. So we'll start off by going, during the time period America was debating whether to expand its territory westward. Some believed that it was justified to use military and political force to gain this territory, and they had a significant impact on the trajectory of government policy. However, many were uncomfortable, why is this word so hard for me? Uncomfortable with the legal authority and use of the military to acquire more land. Those opposing the growth of the U.S. had an impact on the political landscape also. Therefore, both groups debated and impacted the I'm trying to think of a word. Political landscape. I know I just said that. The political. Y'all use the word zeitgeist? I kind of like that word. Probably shouldn't use that word here. Zeitgeist is kind of a cool word. It's like not even, you can't even translate it into English really, because it's like more than like, it's like the spirit of the age, I guess, would be zeitgeist. We're getting too meta. Impact the political situation. There you go.
I can learn to understand you much better if I can get familiar with the way you talk. I need your permission to help.
Okay, I don't know if y'all heard that, but my computer was saying stuff to me. Okay, so there you go. That's the first paragraph, right? Now, by the way, just as a reminder to everybody, that's not like, that I didn't just, that wasn't like a great work of Shakespeare I just wrote there or anything, right? I mean, what I did was I used our thesis formula, therefore, A, B, therefore, hold on, I just messed up. X, however, A, B, therefore, Y. So A is the first argument we're making, which is what did the people who supported this expansion do? B, what did the opposition do? And therefore, Y. That's kind of our statement here that we're going to base the rest of the essay off of, which was those opposing the growth of the U.S. therefore both groups debated and impacted the political situation. So that was our ultimate high-level argument that we're going to be making. And so, by the way, the body paragraphs are going to look like what? We're going to have one body paragraph that's going to talk about those who supported it, what was their impact. We're going to have a body paragraph talking about those who oppose it. We're going to plug in those documents. And then if we wanted to do a third paragraph for the traditional like 5-paragraph essay, which, by the way, guys, there's nothing in the criteria that says it's got to be a 5-paragraph essay. Okay, so if you wanted to do 2 body paragraphs and then close it together and talk about the context of what went on after this, because guys, I mean, hello, they end here in 1855. So what happens next? A civil war, right? I mean, my last paragraph would be something like this. So you had a group that wanted to expand territory, and they wanted to continue the debate of what that looked like in its expansion. Were states, did they have slavery? Did they not? Then you had a group that said, not only do we not want to expand, we want to make sure we're protecting slavery as an institution. This leads to a civil war that's going to tear the country apart. That would be my last paragraph, because remember, at the very end, we want to contextualize what happens next, okay? What's outside of the theme that they asked us about, okay? So again, if you do an opening paragraph, the one I just did with you, you do a body paragraph talking about the documents that supported it, the documents that opposed it, and then you finish it off with that kind of contextualization. I think that's a great essay here for this point in time. Now, guys, I'm about to have to jump off here, but do we have any questions, comments, famous quotes here? If you guys have a question for me, or if you guys want to join the AP government call tomorrow, please shoot me an email and I'll get you on that class tomorrow. But remember, I'll do this tomorrow at 3 and Thursday at 3. But again, if you can't join, I post them to YouTube after. So if you're following that YouTube channel, where I always tweet them out, and I also stick them on the website. So if you want to catch up that way, please do so. And yeah, I think we're going to have to atmosphere. Thanks, Raksha. Now I just see your comment on the chat. I needed that. Should have checked that a little bit ago, but thank you. I hope you guys are doing well. Thanks for joining the call today. And again, please feel free to reach out if you guys have any questions for me going forward. And if not, hope to see you guys soon. Thanks a lot. Have a good rest of the day.